So in October, I did a mini Resident Evil marathon for Halloween. Yes, I know there's a lot scarier things to play for Halloween season than Resident Evil games, but it's one of my favourite gaming franchises, despite it having a lot of questionable entries. Like, I wasn't playing fucking Resident Evil Umbrella Corps or Resident Evil Gaiden on the little marathon I just did. I basically just played the mainline entries. Speaking of mainline entries, I expect Resident Evil 9, or whatever it's called, will be announced soon. I wanted to give my thoughts on what features I'd like to see in the game. I mean, if you want to take every single leak that comes out about the game at face value, then you've probably had the entire game spoiled for you already. Seriously, I don't think I've ever seen so many shameless false leaks come out from a series like Resident Evil. To be fair, amongst all the lies, it does seem like there is always legitimate information that gets leaked. Anyway, let me stop yapping and say what I'd like to see in Resident Evil 9. From an experienced Resident Evil fan, I'd say. Okay, so firstly, I just want to quickly say, I do want it to be Resident Evil 9 and not another remake. Don't think I'm saying I don't enjoy the remake. I mean, 3 is questionable, of course. But I do think it's time to give the remakes a break for now and make an original new entry. I think interchanging a new entry and then a remake and so on, I think that's fair. So ever since Capcom have been on their redemption arc, the 2 mainline entries in the series have been Resident Evil 7 and 8, and both are fairly different gameplay wise, but share an obvious outlying feature, that being the first person perspective. Personally, I actually like the first person gameplay, mainly in RE7, as I think it fit better with its gameplay than RE8. So do I want this trend to continue? Honestly, probably not. I mean, I wouldn't cry if Capcom decided to go that route, but I simply just prefer third person over first in Resident Evil. First person can die with Moldman Ethan. And what about the classic fixed camera angle? Could that make a return? No. Listen, I like the classic camera angle, but that's never coming back. Maybe in a non-mainline release. So I'm not really conflicted about what the camera angle should be. However, something I am somewhat contentious about is if it should be a true classic survival horror game, or more on the lines of Resident Evil 4 and 8 as an action horror game. I love both styles, and honestly, it depends on how I feel on the day on which I prefer. As long as it's done well, I really don't mind which one they go with. But if they do go with action, just don't go overboard like RE6. If they go with a true survival horror game, one thing I hope they would improve upon from RE7 is making the main area bigger and more complicated. What I mean is, the other survival horror classic games like RE2 and 1 have the Spencer Mansion and the RPD, which are both massive starting areas where there's a lot to do and explore and figure out. RE7 was the first time in ages we had anything like that, and while I really like the Baker house, I do wish it would be a bit bigger and or more complex. I guess if you count the whole Baker residence, meaning the old house and Lucas area, I guess you could say it's on level with the RPD or Spencer Mansion. Basically, I want a massive labyrinth area to solve and explore if they go with survival horror. And if they go with a more action-centric style game, great. Resident Evil 4 Remake's gameplay is the best in the series. As I said, just don't go overboard and make RE9 Resident Evil 6-2. Also, I liked Resident Evil 8, but sometimes it felt like it couldn't decide on what type of game it wanted to be. Now, what do I think they'll actually go for? Well, the director in Resident Evil 9 is most likely the one who directed 7. Unless he's working on a separate Resident Evil project, I don't know. And he said a lot about how he values horror. However, I think it is more likely that they're going to go for a more action-focused game this time. And the main reason for this is, I do think they'll go with the classic protagonist this time, and I would agree with that decision. I think we've had enough of playing as boring, generic characters, and it's been too long since the protagonist of a mainline game has been a classic character. So yeah, this is why I think it's most likely going to be more action-orientated, because no one is going to believe that the steroid super soldier Chris, or Leon, is cautiously going to go through a game scared of bioweapons and carefully manage resources and ammo rather than just suplex or fly kick anything in their way. I don't know, maybe at their age, maybe you could make it a survival horror game. Maybe Chris gets a hernia on a mission or something and it limits his abilities. Maybe Leon roundhouse kicks a fucking enemy and, I don't know, his knee gives way or something. Okay, but seriously, I think the only classic character you could stick in a classic survival horror game is Rebecca Chambers or something, as I don't think she's as combat experienced as the others. I don't know, maybe she is. I haven't watched the movies she's in. So who is the classic character I would like to see as the protagonist? Well, it's going to be a generic, boring answer, but I hope it's Leon. Listen, I know the last Resident Evil game to be released was Resident Evil 4 Remake, which of course stars Leon. However, we haven't seen him in a new mainline entry since Resident Evil 6 in 2012. I think it's time to see him in a new entry, and it seems like it actually might be the case, as it seems like the most credible leaks indicate that it will be Leon to start as the protagonist. Other than Leon, a close second for me would be Jill. I mean, she hasn't appeared in a mainline game since 2009, which is crazy. I'd be happy with any one of them to be the protagonist. Whoever it is, I hope these two appear one way or another. They've only been together in an animated movie, Death Island, which I feel is a shame, as it would have been more interesting for them to meet in an actual game rather than a mediocre movie. As for the story and plot, I wouldn't usually care about where Capcom decided to take it. I mean, it's not like Resident Evil was the pinnacle of storytelling. However, Resident Evil 8 ended with a genuine interesting cliffhanger, insinuating that the BSAA have turned corrupt. I know I said I'd like to see Leon as a protagonist, but I realise that Leon doesn't have much relevance with the BSAA, so it may seem a bit contradictory to say I want Leon and the BSAA plotline to continue. I think you could make it work, don't get me wrong, but I realise it probably would have to be one or the other. I don't care to go into the specifics on what I'd like to see from the actual plot, but the concept of the organisation that Chris and Jill basically started for the purpose of countering bioterror going corrupt and using bioweapons themselves is very interesting. If that were the route Capcom decided to go, Chris and Jill would of course have to be involved, and it could be a good opportunity to include a bunch of other characters like Rebecca, Barry, and maybe even Sheva, as they are all BSAA affiliated. Discovering what's happening at the BSAA and uncovering their goal would feel like a significant point in the series. However, Resident Evil has an extensive history on not following up on plot points or cliffhangers, so don't be surprised if the cliffhanger from Resident Evil 8 is swept under the carpet and be resolved in a random note under a log or something. Before I end, I have a few random extra ideas and features I might like to see. I would appreciate more game modes after completing the game, such as things like Invisible Enemy or Real Survivor from Resident Evil 1. The recent Resident Evil games just unlock a new, harder difficulty once you beat the game. It would be nice to see if more interesting or different modes were unlocked after beating the game, or doing challenges. I mean, why not put an actual official item or enemy randomizer instead of it being modded in? I don't play on PC, Capcom. Let me play a fucking randomizer, put it in your game. What they're probably gonna do is add a mercenaries mode into the game. That's not a complaint, by the way. I like most of the mercenary modes in Resident Evil games. The most recent one in 4 Remake I really liked. I just wish it was a bit harder. But if they plan to do a similar one to the one in RE8, then we don't want that, man. We don't want that shit. That one was crap, let's be real. Anyway, so that's the general features I'd like to see in a Resident Evil 9. According to the most prominent leaks on the game, it's going to be Leon and Jill on an island full of moon worshipping cultists or something like that, while being pursued by a goat man. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the recent leaks are probably bullshit, because I thought that goat man rumor was disproven ages ago. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Hopefully we get a trailer at the Game Awards.